Hello, this is Dr. Lori. Welcome to this video on creating tables. So the golden rule about creating tables is that you must create your table in some kind of a word processing software, such as Microsoft Word. You could use Pages. If you're good with other kinds of editing, the main thing to remember is the information that comes out of SPSS or any other statistical software really is giving you the numbers so that you can create that table. It's very important to have certain kind of formatting in your table, and so let's go over what some of those kinds of things are. For a scale variable, if you're putting this into a table, the first thing to remember is that the variable name is going to likely be left justified with the table. So you would type height or whatever, and very often it's preferred to have whatever it is that are the units of measure. So height in centimeters, BMI in kilograms per meter squared, different blood measurements in milligrams per deciliter. Those units in a parentheses here would really help to clarify if somebody is looking at that and may not be using the same units that you do, say, in your country or in your area. And then somewhere over here on the right hand side, you're going to have a column that's centered, and you'll report whatever the number is for the mean, and then a space. Don't draw that line, but there is a space. So the mean, and then the standard deviation. So formatting, this kind of formatting really helps a person to be able to track across multiple variables. You can see the mean, and then you see the standard deviation within the parentheses, and so it helps you distinguish between those two variables. And again, centered in some fashion in that particular column. For a categorical variable, it has many of the same features. So let's assume this is the left-hand side of the table, and you would have the overall variable name. But in this case, there are no units typically. We saw an exception to that when we were looking at some of the example tables, but usually the variable name does not have units. So for whatever category A, this would be indented by a specific amount that seems acceptable. Category B, and so on, however many categories you have. And then for each one of those categories directly across from it, right about in here, you would have the N, or the frequency of that particular category, and again a space before you put a parentheses, and then whatever the percentage is. Now there are differences of thought in terms of whether you want to actually include the percentage symbol. Some do, some don't. I actually really like seeing it because it's not a whole lot of extra information, but if you have a whole bunch of columns that all say percent, I can see how that becomes a little bit redundant and maybe distracting. And so it really depends on your table. If you add them in and you feel like it helps to set it apart from those continuous variables so that you can really tell the difference, then it might actually be helpful. The third kind of variable that we have is the one that we only occasionally have, that's sort of the combination between these two. If the scale is not normally distributed or categorical, if it's ordinal and it has 8 or more categories, occasionally we'll have, again, just variable name. You would type the actual variable name, and then you would put, again, centered, the median, and the probably interquartile range. Some journals prefer to see the full range instead of the interquartile range. But then another important feature then is down here at the bottom to specify anything that may need to be clarified. Specifically, standard deviation is not the only thing that could go here. We'll learn in the future that this could also be the standard error, which ends up being a different number. You could report the mean and the standard error. So it's nice down here at the bottom of the table to specify exactly what you used. Especially if you do not include that percentage symbol, you would want to specify that the number outside is the count or the frequency, and the number inside the parentheses is the percentage. If you include percentages, then that's probably a little bit more obvious. So that really summarizes the way that you want to build your tables. Make sure you include a nice title that includes person, place, and time. Not automatically required to include all of that, and it depends sometimes on your journal, but I think it's a good practice to at least be thinking about that, and then your footnotes. Any kind of abbreviations that you have, even if it's within a variable name or within a category specification, if you have any abbreviations, they must go in the footnotes as well. So that concludes this video on create some helpful hints for creating tables.